is the idea, or was the idea, that you wanted a venue for Republicans to gather without a convention where you're voting for people.
Right.
You wanted them to just get the pressure off. Let's not talk about candidates or counting votes or caucuses. Let's just review the situation and decide what our strategy is going into the next election.
Sure, and work on ideas that are floating around and so forth. It was sort of a low-key approach to the philosophy that the party has and so forth.
Was Governor Williams really the wild-eyed liberal that a lot of conservative Republicans in the late 50s depicted him as being? Maybe your view of whether he was or wasn't is different now than it was then, but when you stop to think about it, a lot of what he advocated was picked up on by two succeeding Republican governors, George Romney and Bill Milliken. What do you think? Was Soapy Williams really that far out in left field?
I felt then, and I felt always in working with him, and I worked more closely on a personal basis later on. But I felt then that his basic beliefs were very liberal, and he was a charming guy. You couldn't get mad at him on a personality basis because he was, but he believed in some things that I found impossible to accept from a government point of view, and so we had some marked differences.
Let me ask you one question. Flashback to 7 years before the time we're talking about now, 1951, I believe. You were in the State House. U.S. Senator Arthur Vandenberg, a Republican from Grand Rapids, died in office, and Governor Williams appointed a Detroit News reporter, a Detroit Times reporter, Blair Moody. A big surprise, a shocker, to succeed him. How did you view that appointment, and how did Republicans view that appointment as compared to, you know, what else might have happened?
Yeah, very frankly, I didn't have any judgment on Blair Moody. I anticipated that as a Williams appointee, he probably shared a lot of Soapy's beliefs and approaches to government, but I had no preconception of what he would be like, and so I didn't react adversely to that. He had a good reputation among journalists, and of
course he didn't last long.
No,
he was only in office a year and a half, and then he was beaten by Charlie Potter, a Republican congressman from, I believe, Alpena, or that area anyway, ran against him for Senate in '52 and won in the Eisenhower landslide and served one term as senator. So you must have known Charlie Potter, right?
I did.
So what
know
was
Charlie.
he like?
Well, Charlie Potter was a delightful guy, and I got to know him better later on. But he was handicapped, as you know. He'd been he was a war veteran and had been wounded and so forth, and he had difficulty in getting around. But he was a very well-intentioned person, and you know, Bill, most of the people on both sides of the political spectrum have very good intentions. They just believe different things.
You mean then and now?
Well, at least then. I must say to you, today, as we're doing this, I'm not sure that the same standards apply.
In other words, things have gotten a little bit more vitriolic and personal.
It seems so to me.
Yeah. So you're saying basically what you said a few minutes ago about your relationship with G. Menon Williams, that you felt that even though you had ideological and philosophical differences with him, you had a personally cordial and civil relationship, you respected each other, and you felt that that was really the way it was with most politicians, even of opposite parties at that time. Yeah.
Well, the Republicans and Democrats in the House got along quite well. We weren't buddy-buddy, but I mean, nobody was out slashing and
issuing press releases every afternoon and so forth. Well, let me ask you this. In 1958, you're chairman. Charlie Potter runs for re-election. He's beaten by Phil Hart.
Right.
Did you know Phil Hart?
Yes.
And what was your impression of Phil Hart and that race and everything else?
Phil Hart was had a magnificent personality and was a very pleasant, nice person. I liked him, and we got along well. On a personal basis, I think I felt a greater warmth toward Phil Hart than I did to Williams.
Governor Williams.
Governor Williams. Mm-hmm. But he was just a...
And he was lieutenant governor, I think, at that time.
He was lieutenant governor.
Yeah. Nearing the end of the 50s, there was a group called Citizens for Michigan, either associated with or spearheaded by George Romney, designed to overhaul Michigan's constitution, call a constitutional convention. There was a vote that initially failed, another one. They finally had a constitutional convention right at the end of your tenure, 1961-62. Of course, that was just a year or so after the famous election between Nixon and Kennedy in 1960. I mean, it was a real, frenetic, exciting, interesting time in Michigan politics.
It was a fascinating time. The official Republican Party, as such, was not active in the Constitutional Convention activities. I'm certain that individual Republicans relayed their thoughts on various matters. I met with Neil Stabler at that time because
he was the Democratic state chairman, and he had been all during the 50s, right?
Yes.
So you got to know him pretty well.
I got to know Neil very well, and we worked together on some things, and to that extent, I guess you could say that we did get involved in the Constitutional Convention, but that was a bipartisan thing. Neil and I...
So both of you thought in some way, shape, or form maybe it was a good idea to have a constitutional convention.
Yes.
Okay, and so finally it's validated and it convenes, and of course you leave office, and I think actually Neil Stabler left about that time too, as state Democratic chairman. But George Romney, where does he come into the picture?
George Romney, I had not known at all before he before he engineered, and I think he did engineer the success of the Constitutional Convention. But I got to know him while the convention was going on, and in fact, John Martin, who was national committeeman, and I called on George Romney to see if we could not get him to run for United States Senator.
Oh, Senator.
In 1960.
60, okay.
Yeah. And
that would have been against Pat McNamara, who had won in 1954, so he was running for re-election.
Yeah. And Romney declined. He didn't want to do it at that time, but it was a positive approach and a positive rejection, because I think John Martin and I both realized that that George Romney had an interest in elective office,
running for something.
someday.
And maybe even 2 years later.